So my name is Brian Lord. I'm actually a farm boy. The Lords, and I say Lord, so in case Jim can remember me, I might remember the emotions as well. Hopefully get the Lord in there. It's an easy last name to remember. But the Lords have been farmers since before America was a country. So they were farmers way back in Delaware before it became a state, before it became a nation. So they were there for 100 or so years. Moved to Indiana, where I'm from originally. Moved into so 2 parents, 6 kids, and as my dad liked to say, 3 dogs. Moved into a 399 square foot log cabin. We still have the log cabin. The county comes around and does tours through the log cabin for Pioneer Days for the kids. And so growing up as a little kid, I just assumed I'd be a farmer too. We'd been farmers for 2.5 centuries. Why not me too? My mom tells a story. I'd go up to my dad and I'd say, Dad, she put me in bip overalls because that's just so classic. Dad, can you teach me how to farm? Like it's something he could just knock out in an afternoon. So I was going to be a farmer. And unfortunately, life throws you curveballs someday. I still remember the day I had all these John Deere tractors, international tractors, and playing on the floor, and my dad stormed out. And I remember that day when he left and didn't see him for a while or for a long time. My parents ended up getting divorced. And so we had a situation that was very difficult. Single mom, 4 kids. She became a nurse and worked midnights, and everything seemed to go wrong at one time. We moved from the country into the city. So big change there. 3 of the 4 of us had health problems. I was probably the worst. I had major intestinal surgery, was in the hospital for a week. So you just have all these things going wrong, very difficult, all coming together at once. And this story is really a story about how people like you had a big impact on my life and kind of the lessons I learned and wanted to share about how to make a difference in other people's lives. So around this time when everything was going wrong, that's when God showed up. Even though we moved to the city, we still went to this little country church. And I remember, by the door to the sanctuary, there's like this white wooden box. And I would peer into it, and you'd see these black and white cereal boxes and bagged cereal and all kinds of the generic stuff that a lot of people donate. And I'd look and I'd say, Mommy, this is just like the food we have. And it just never occurred to me as a kid that that's where our food was coming from. One tip I do have for you is that when you do make donations of food, there's definitely a smart logic to getting the cheapest food you can to donate as much as you can to feed as many people as possible. But every once in a while, sneak in some of the good stuff. I remember I would be jealous of my neighbors because, of course, kids around you don't know what's going on in your life. And we'd get donated the generic vanilla wafers. And of course, I'd see my friends, they'd have the apostrophe N-I-L-L-A, Nilla wafers. And so I'd be jealous of them. And so growing up now, whenever we donate food, I always make sure to donate Nilla wafers, even though I'm not obsessed with them, but I want to make sure those kids have some kind of good thing. You have a great organization. I want to point out my good friend Regina Harvey's back there. She runs a nonprofit in Rutherford County called Dominion Financial. So they help people through difficult financial times, teaching them financial literacy, but also they do a great feeding program, like helping people get inexpensive foods so that parents can feed their families when they're in difficult times. So definitely, if you're interested in that, make sure to connect with Regina. Going back to my story, people definitely came through in other ways as well. We'd have clothes donated. We have 4 growing kids, all ages spread out. We get these bags of clothes and open them up and be like, wow, is plaid still in style? We just don't know. And the story that really relates to a lot of people like you here is a woman and her husband who's a Christian business person, who's a doctor, and they really showed up. So my mom was a pretty new Christian. She'd only been a Christian for about 2 years, and the woman who'd led her to Christ was a woman named Susie Scott. And so my mom had started going to her Bible study, had become a Christian. My older sister became a Christian. I became a Christian. My 2 younger brothers eventually did as well when they got older. And so Susie had been really there for my mom for her needs. But she didn't just stop there, and she talked to her husband, and they would do some neat things for us. We'd show up at home, and we'd find that the refrigerator had been stocked, or they'd helped in different ways. And the story, just going home for the 4th of July and being with family, I actually got to hear a really cool story and get the full side of it. When we were kids, we'd moved into this house, this little house in the neighborhood, and despite all this help from grandparents and family and everyone else, we'd still come up short. And so we needed to pay our mortgage, and we were $100 short, and it was due the next day. And so my mom prayed, dear God, just ask that you get this to us somehow, just provide this. So sure enough, the next day, we get to, my mom opens the door, and taped to the door is an envelope with a check in it from our church for $100. And people knew that they could get money to us through the church and do it anonymously, because a lot of people like to donate that way. And I remember my mom, we gathered around the check, and she just prayed. She said, God, thank you so much for providing for us. But I just ask that you bless whoever made this donation, bless them 100 times over. So years later, my mom is sharing this story at Susie's Bible study, and Susie perks up. And what had happened, the other side of the story from the giver, from the Christian business person's perspective, so they had actually kind of had a difficult time in their finances as well, not to the extent of us, but still everybody goes through times where it's not as perfect as it should be, but they still felt called to give this money, to donate this money to us. And they'd already set up this vacation, everything had already been paid for, so they decided to go on the vacation anyway. And as they were there, they're watching TV, and they just see that this stock of theirs just going up and up and up. And so that week they went on vacation, after they made that $100 donation, the stock went up $10,000. And so God had not only answered my mom's prayer for us, that we be blessed and be able to make our mortgage payment, the Scotts were blessed 100 times over, and God had answered that prayer too. Another amazing thing that they did is realizing that we were young, brand new Christians, they wanted to step up and help us that way. And so they had donated, they came to us and they said, we want your kids to have a firm Christian foundation. There was a little Christian school down the road from us, and they said, we're going to pay for your kids to go to 6 years each of a Christian school. And it's maybe not like the big private Christian schools that you have around where we live, but still that's a huge commitment, 24 years of Christian school volunteering to pay for. And sure enough, they went through it. And I was able to get this really firm foundation from my mom, who read to us a chapter of the Old Testament, a chapter of the New Testament every night, but also through this school. And that really impressed upon me the importance of giving back. I'd been given so much, and I needed to learn how to do that. And one of the examples that I saw was of the Good Samaritan. So, and shown to me in a way that was different, because usually when we think Good Samaritan, okay, that's a nice person. And it kind of stops there. If you see something, you kind of do it. But if you really look at it, so Luke 10, 33 to 35 are kind of the core verses about the Good Samaritan's actions himself. So to bring you that story, there's a man who's traveling. Jesus is telling a story about a man who's traveling. He's mugged, beaten, left for dead, naked on the roadside. And two official good people, kind of like our equivalent of maybe like a missionary and a pastor, walk right by. But the Samaritan comes along, who's not officially a good person. In our heads a lot of times we'll say, okay, they're a missionary, they're supposed to do the good stuff, and that kind of lets us off the hook. But the Samaritan, who if you read through it, you kind of get a feel this is a business person on their normal route. He obviously knew people there. And so the first thing that he had was a mindset. So a lot of people understand the Samaritan mindset, that he saw this man and he took pity on him. In verse 33, it says he saw him and he took pity on him. But it didn't stop there. He had a skill set. You can see that the Samaritan was ready with a skill set and a toolkit before he ever got there to meet this man's needs. So you see that the Bible says that he took wine and oil and dressed the man's wound. So wine has alcohol in it. It's a natural disinfectant. It helps clean it out. The oil, when you apply oil, if you're putting Neosporin on, you're putting oil on, that helps clean the wound and helps heal the wound. So this man had medical training. I think that's something everybody should at least have basics of. He put the man on his donkey. He had the toolkit. A lot of times we'll have a blind spot to a lot of the tools that we have. We think we're one-dimensional, but we have so many different things that we can use. This man used his donkey the Samaritan used the donkey to get this man in need to an inn. And he took care of him for a full day. And so he used that continued medical training that he had, but he also paid for this man. He had extra money to be able to pay for this man, not only for that night, but for time past that. So he went into his toolkit and had that. One of the things I think it's so important for us to have is a giving emergency fund. Years ago, my wife and I started this. So we have our own sort of basic emergency fund that we have, but we also have a separate one that is specifically for giving. And we've had times where that's come up. A friend of ours that was in our Sunday school, he found out that his dad was nearing passing away. And it turns out, his dad's in South Dakota. It turns out a last-minute plane ticket to South Dakota is very expensive. They couldn't afford it. He was going to miss his dad. And so we got together with some of our people, and we didn't have to think about it. We knew that we had the money that we could give to him for that. Another time, my cousin's house burned down. And there's that time period before the insurance company gets there where somebody's in really good need. And we didn't have to think about it. If you start a giving emergency fund and you have that money in there specifically for those things set aside, you don't have to think about it. You can take action right when it's needed. The other thing, too, as business people, we have connections. If you look at the last verse in there, it talks about the Good Samaritan. He had that trust with the inn owner. I know a lot of people that travel for business, you probably have a specific hotel in a specific city, maybe even a specific room that you go to, and you build up relationships with people where you travel to. He knew that innkeeper was going to take care of the man in need. Conversely, the innkeeper knew that this man would pay his bills. He said, when I come back, so he had to go get his business done. He said, when I come back, I'll pay for any additional needs that this man has. So he knew coming back that he'd built up this relationship, that the two of them trusted each other. And a lot of times we have trust as people in business, as people making connections, that we have so many tools and skills at our disposal we might not even realize, but we really need to put those things into action. For me, one of those times that came up, taking that example of the Scots, I really thought of myself, I'd become successful in business through my 20s and was able to become with my wife. We were able to become what fundraising people call major donors. And that had really taken on an identity for myself. We were able to help fund the building of an AIDS clinic in Africa and do some different things here and abroad. And my job as a talent agent is based on corporations having extra money. So I book high-profile sports speakers, politicians, best-selling authors to speak at these gigantic corporate events. Well, when the economy tanked, my income was cut in half. And we still donated, but it was in a drastically different scenario than it had been previously. And so I was really faced with this difficult question of who I was. And so the question was, if I can't give money, how can I make an impact on the world? Just as all of us have, sometimes things get taken away from us. And for me, that identity as a donor had been taken away for that time. So I like to start stuff. So I wrote down 5 different ideas for nonprofits and wrote out little business plans for each of them. And I prayed about it. I approached some friends who knew me pretty well. And I said, which of these should I do? And they all pointed to one. And it was a nonprofit called Non-Board Board. And so the idea behind it is it's like the board you wish you had. And so I'd had these different nonprofit leaders who'd asked me to be on their board, and I couldn't be on all of them. So I'm like, I'm going to cheat, and I'm just going to make them all come to me. So we started doing monthly get-togethers, and I realized pretty quickly that even though I knew maybe more than they did in certain business areas, I knew people who know more than I did. So like Living Sent, I started a monthly speaker series. And we started bringing people who were A-level on fundraising, A-level on strategic planning, and A-level on legal issues that nonprofits might fund, or social media, and all these different things. And we really started seeing this very cool impact grow from that. And with that, there comes a lot of humility. I know with people, with Living Sent, with Bob or Jerry, whoever it might be, a lot of times they're making an impact on people they never see. And a lot of times with us, we have to realize we're going to do that too. At our first board meeting, and Regina was there for that, I handed out 4 dominoes. And I pointed out, this is us, and these are the people we're going to make an impact on. We're going to make an impact here, touch this person's going to do this, and this person. We will never make contact with that in person, but we have to have that humility and that knowledge that God is going to make that impact through us. And we ended up having nonprofit leaders. The groups were never that big, anywhere from 10, 15, 20, 30 people. But these nonprofit leaders really moved and grew, and we ended up helping nonprofit leaders who went out and made an impact on 11 million people in 32 countries and 5 continents. And so for me, that was just a huge thing to see what God did. For all of us, we're going to have times where things are taken away from us. Something that's part of our identity is going to be taken away. And we need to rely on God and the people He's sent to be in our lives to help us find what that next thing is. Finally, my dad, he was not the best person at the beginning of the story. We went through that time period where he was not there. He was not. We were kind of the typical kids that you'd hear about, that you get all ready for dad to come and pick him up and he doesn't show. And financially, a lot of other things just wasn't there. And God again uses strange things to get things done. In Indiana, you can have crazy weather that pops up. We had, and it's still like in capital letters, the ice storm. And that night, my dad was out driving, and he was hit by another car, and the entire left side of his body was crushed. He'd not always made the smartest health decisions. He'd been a smoker. And so with his left lung collapse, that's not a good thing for anybody, but especially bad for a smoker. And so we went to visit him in the hospital. I still remember NCAA basketballs on in the waiting room that we had to watch forever before they'd let us in. It was, ICU. They've got the curtain there. He's got a trach down his throat. He can't talk. He can only communicate on a whiteboard. And during that time, God used that terrible thing that happened to him to really change him. When he got out, he took us all to lunch at Long John Silver's, because my dad knows how to show us a good time. That's like that's like Captain D's here. I don't know if there's too many Long John Silver's. But after we left, my dad had always had that personality of, a lot of people would compare him to like Dirty Harry. Like he always kind of has this look like this, and very quiet, and did kind of look like Clint Eastwood, and we left that, and my sister's like, who is that guy? Because his personality had totally changed. He was open, he was joking around. We frankly didn't know what to do, how to react to it. And my dad from that point really changed. We were able to witness to him, and he really became part of our lives. And as a kid, there are all these different things that you miss. For me, the one thing that I really missed as a kid that always stuck out to me was playing catch with my dad with a baseball. There was one time I'd snuck a tennis ball into my bag when I'd stayed at he and his new wife's house, and had played catch with a tennis ball for a couple minutes. But I'd really wanted to play catch with a baseball. Has anybody seen the movie The Natural with Robert Redford? My friends, all of us loved that movie when we were kids. And there's the famous iconic scene where he gets up there, he's a lefty, and he goes up and hits the home run to win the pennant. It hits the lights, it shatters. There's sparks flying everywhere as he's rounding the bases. And everybody, all my friends, that was their favorite scene. For me, there's a scene that most people forget about just after that, where he finally gets to play catch with his son, whose childhood he's missed. And I so wanted that. So a few years later, I just turned 30. My daughter was born, and so everyone came down to her dedication at church. And so my dad came down, my siblings came down. It was a big event. Before they got there, I said, okay, I'm going to play catch with my dad. So I went out to the store. I got a glove and a baseball, and I bring it home, and my dad comes, everybody's there, and I completely chicken out. I don't do it. And so they're leaving, his wife's in the car, and my dad is getting in the car, and literally the door is closing. I said, Dad, wait a second. Do you want to go play catch in the backyard? And my dad, who's very much like, it's not country, it's farmer, and he's like, well, yeah. So he gets out, and we go in the back, and we get to throw a baseball. And it's a dream come true for me. And I'm so excited. And then my older sister says, well, I never got to play catch with Dad either. She doesn't want to be left out. So I'm like, okay, here you go. So she started playing catch. My brothers are saying, we never got to play catch either. So my dad's down here, and the four of us are here just taking turns handing the glove back and forth. So we all finally got to play catch with my dad. So for all of us, it was an amazing moment. And it's a good thing that we did it when we did. A couple years later, he had a heart attack. My dad had a lot of stuff wrong with him, but we didn't know that was one of them. And he passed away. And so for us, obviously very difficult. As a person, when you pass away suddenly, you don't have a chance to put everything how you want it, how you want people to see things. And my dad, unfortunately, had to sell his house. We go in to kind of look things over and pick things up, and we go into his office, and right there on his desk is the ball and the glove. And so for us, that really told us that moment that meant so much to us meant so much to him too. So as you're going about your day and looking at different things that you can do, don't forget the small stuff. That, sometimes we have these big grand ideas, but the grandest ones are sometimes with our family. Realize that God has given you this mindset, this Samaritan's mindset, to go out and make a difference with people. Realize that you've got this toolkit and these skill sets that you have that maybe you don't even realize, but take the time to think through those things and see how God can use you in the world. Thank you very much.